All right. Welcome to Brandon's Black History once again. This week we'll be covering the one drop rule, which was if you had any ounce of African descent in you, you were pretty much considered a second class citizen. And there were all kinds of things that went with that, including the laws against interracial marriage and laws against black people having relations with white people also with that. And if you had a child, you would be fined or in jail or become a slave. If you're a woman, if you're a white woman, you'd become a slave for 5 years, and then your kid would be a slave for 30 years if you had a child with a black person. So we'll cover that tonight in this week, and then after this we'll have a open discussion. Any questions or anything like that, we'll do that here after we're done. So I'll go ahead and start the presentation. All right. So the one drop rule, a rule that should have never been introduced at all, but it was just another way to try to keep the superior race from mixing with the second class citizen, as they would call, with the black race or the slaves back then. So the American history, you cannot talk about American history without talking about race mixing, right? The laws date back to 1661 through 1967. The first recorded marriage was the Disney story of John and Pocahontas in 1614. Of course, by race and black and Indian back then. So it was, in doing this research, it was okay for whites and Indians to mix, but it was not okay for the whites and blacks to mix. And they also didn't want blacks and Indians to mix. Okay. So what they did was come up with these rules and saying that, you know, we don't want them mixing, so we're going to bring up these rules and make it to where they won't. But as we'll go through this, the rules didn't apply for everyone. It depended on who you were and what rules you had to follow. So in 1850, 1860s, the mulatto slave population, which they do not use that term anymore, grew 67%. That in 10 years, your slave population between mixed kids grew 67%. Black slave population only grew 20%. So who was having all the kids during the slave time, right? Like, who was the ones going out there and having relations with somebody that they say they shouldn't be, but they were anyway? The one drop rule: someone with one distant African ancestor who was black. That's what the rule was. So if your great grandpa or great grandma or your great great grandfather or grandma was African descent, you were considered one drop uh, black. And then when we get to the Jim Crow laws and all that, there was all of that in segregation, because before that or during that time, they could tell, you could pretty much tell who was black and who was white, right? You could tell who's mixed and who's not. And that's usually what they used to determine your race. Okay, so this kept the children from these relationships as slaves. When it was the slave owner, the man, having relationships with the female slave, that kept the children from being slaves. But if it was the woman who did it and had relations with a slave guy, then that woman could become a slave herself or pay a fine, and then her child would become a slave for 30 years. Or if she paid that fine, then it was okay. Okay. And usually the fine was about 10 pounds of tobacco. So if a lady didn't have 10 pounds of tobacco, then she would usually work in the house while her child worked in the fields with everybody else. Booker T. Washington, quote here: "It is a fact that if a person is known to have 1% of African blood in his veins, he ceases to be a white man. The 99% Caucasian blood does not weigh by the side of the 1% of African blood. The white blood counts for nothing. The person is a Negro every time. Unless, for slavery wise, unless that man, the father, was the slave owner, then it kept his kid from being a slave." But everybody, so we always hear like the black gene, right? The black gene takes over the white gene. And that's why we consider kids who are mixed black. That's not scientifically true, that a black blood does not overtake white blood. It was back in slavery time that they considered if you were a mixed child, then your blackness took over the white. So if you're half and half, you're black, period. No questions asked, you're black. Okay. So in Virginia, in 1661, they passed a law that interracial marriage and a law that ministers could not marry interracial couples was passed. So in 1661, note, if you're black and white, you can't marry each other. Ministers, if a interracial couple comes to you and says, hey, they want to get married, you cannot do that. It is illegal for you to do that. You will go to jail. It is a felony for a black and a white couple to marry. In 1662, they declared that extramarital sex is a crime and increased the penalty for if it was cross-colored. So again, if you're black and white, it was worse if it was you with your same race. So in 1691, Virginia then criminalized marriage by interracial couples, right? So back in 1661, it was prohibited, and in 1691, it became a felony. Virginia required that any white woman who bore a mulatto child to pay a fine or be a slave for 5 years, right? So we already covered that. 30 years for your kid, 5 years for you, unless you paid your fine. In 1776, 12 out of 13 colonies had declared their independence, banned intermarriage. So no matter what, if you love somebody from a different race, that was a no. You cannot marry each other. You cannot be around each other. You cannot sleep in the same bed. You can't be in the same house, or else you would be arrested. That is, but if you were white and Indian, it was okay. Okay. Thomas Jefferson wanted to intermix race. He wanted to intermix Indian and white to become one race, one people. But they didn't want, which is funny because Thomas Jefferson has mixed children, they didn't want blacks and whites mixing. And they didn't want Indian and blacks mixing because they didn't want the second-class citizens to become one race and to come together. Because then the minority then becomes the majority, and they didn't want that. So a birth certificate from Virginia, as you see your birthplace, your mother and your father, and what color they are, right? They actually had to put their color. And then at the bottom, if you read that, a white person is one with no trace, whatever, of blood of another race, except that one with 1/16 of the blood of African Indian, unmixed with other race, may be classified as white. So as I was reading this stuff, I was finding if you're white and Japanese, you're considered white. If you're white and Indian, you're considered white. If you're white and Chinese, you're considered white. If you're white and anything else, you're white. If you're white and black, you're black. No other race in America has this rule. No race in any other country has this rule. So why would it be that if you're mixed with black or African descent, why is that worse than being mixed with Indian, mixed with Chinese, mixed with Japanese? Because when we bring these slaves over, we can't give them the same rights as us, right? They can't do what we do. They can't have the same rights as us, and they can't be taking our women, and their women can't be taking our men.
Until very recently, any person with one drop of black blood was black. In America's beginning, there was race mixing, especially among indentured servants and slaves. In 1676, during Bacon's Rebellion, these blacks and whites fought the white ruling class holding them in bondage, and lost. To prevent future rebellions, the ruling class introduced one of the earliest variations of the one drop of black blood rule, transforming a class-based society into a race-based society.
The purpose of the rule was to make clear distinctions between black people and white people. Well, I may not ever be on the bottom down there with you because I'll never be a black person, but I can certainly have some sort of prestige or social status psychologically for being white.
Interracial unions were outlawed. Those with a drop of black blood were pushed into the black. This one-drop rule defined slavery. and entrenched the laws of segregation. Until the Civil Rights Movement destroyed those laws. But not the one-drop rule, which reinvented itself into the 5 primary race boxes used by identity politics in its quest for racial justice.
The 5 boxes of the 5 boxes that we fill out for our applications, right? Anything that we fill out, those boxes are there. We put other for my son, right? So the rules don't apply to everyone, which I talked about earlier. 1910, right? 29 out of 46 states, they prosecuted intermarriage, but not interracial sex. White men and black women, that was tolerated. So back then, when all these laws were going through, if you were a white man and a black woman, it was fine. And the same thing during the slave time, right? If it was the owner and a female slave, it was okay. It was fine. It's always been fine, right? But if it's a black man and a white woman, then you were getting punished for that. So look at the race law and then look at the women and men, right? Men are being treated differently than women, right? It's okay for the man to do it, but it's not okay for the woman to do it. So if it was a black man, black woman, hey, you guys can go ahead and get married, whatever, doesn't matter. But once you go into the other race, they didn't want that happening at all. But if it was a man and a woman, white man, black woman, you know what? We'll just look the other way. It's okay. If it's a white man, right, then it's still pure, right? You're still preserving the racial purity if it's a white man and a black woman. But if it's a black man and a white woman, that child is not pure. That child is now dirty. That child's genes are not white. He's automatically, or she is automatically black. So in Arkansas, 1911, they passed the bill, one-drop rule. Interracial, living together, felony. Define Negro as one who has any Negro blood in them. One who has any ounce of Negro blood in them is second-class citizen. Person belonging to a social or political group whose rights and opportunities are inferior to those who the dominant group in a society. The dominant group, right? So I don't know if you can read the little news clipping. Act 320 makes cohabitation between the white and Negro race a felony punishable with not less than 1 month nor more than 1 year in the penitentiary. It is defined for the purpose of this act as being unlawful a person of the white and Negro races, whether open or secret. Any woman who shall be delivered of a mulatto child shall be deemed prime guilty without further proof to justify conviction. But to man shall be convicted on much a charge upon the I can't really see it either, evidence of the woman. The act is to take effect March 3rd, 21st. So what it's saying there, the man, again, don't really matter, right? Can they prove it? Can the woman prove it? You know, can, just because that baby looks mixed, don't mean it's his. But if that woman has a child that's mixed, the white woman that has a child that's mixed, she's punished. So, see a lot of different rules for different people. Jim Crow, decades from 1910 to 1930. Tennessee had their law, 1910. Louisiana followed. Texas and Arkansas, 1911. Mississippi, 1917. North Carolina, 1923. Virginia, Alabama, Georgia. During this time, other states, Florida, Indiana, Kentucky, Maryland, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, Utah, they kept their old blood fraction status, which was 1/16 or 1/32 for their one drop rule. So if you were 1/16 black, or if you 1/32 black, you were black. So this is why, and now, right, all of these mixed children are considered black from all of these rules that were going on during slavery. These rules were made because some people could pass as white. Some people who were mixed that didn't look black could pass as white. So when they were born, you know, you have a black parent, a white parent, or even if both parents there were white, if you go down the line and show that great grandfather is black or great 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 grandfather is black, then you are considered black. You're considered African American. Even though you pass as white, you are still considered black. So all of these rules way back then now defines what we have now as mixed children, right? Mixed people, mixed race. One drop. Okay. But again, did it matter if you had a one drop of Indian? No. Did it matter if you had one drop of Japanese? Nope. One drop of Chinese? Nope. Okay. So then the civil rights, you had the Brown versus Board of Education. Everybody should know what that is. Okay. Then you had the Florida ruling. And then you had the Loving versus Commonwealth of Virginia that was at the U.S. Supreme Court. All of this stuff started back in slave times, during slavery. But yet, in the 60s, they were still fighting for just, hey, we want to be able to go to school. You know, we want to be able to live together. And then we would love to be able to marry each other without being arrested, without going to prison, without having to pay a fine. And then, you know, without, during the slave time, without knowing that your kid is going to be a slave for 30 years. So think about that. Your kid who is mixed, because you had a kid with a black man, a slave, your kid then is stripped away from you And for 30 years, he's raised by at least for 18 years, he's raised by somebody else. And then he's a man and he's working out in the fields and probably doesn't know who his mom is. You know, he might know who his dad is, but it's something that shouldn't have taken during the 60s to get rid of. But are we actually rid of it today? Right? Like some of these rules are still going on, even though it's outlawed. Everybody would consider my son to be black, right? And when we fill out a application, if we fill out any kind of school forms, if you fill out the census, what do you put? In 2000 was the first year that you could put multiple race. So just 20 years ago, during that census, you were either black or white, or Mexican, Chinese, Japanese, or any of those. You couldn't put white and black like you can now. You could put other then, but that was your only choice. So you're either black, you're either white, or you're other if you're mixed. The Loving versus Virginia.
On July 11, 1958, at 2 a.m., a county sheriff entered the home of Virginia couple Richard and Mildred Loving, forced them out of their bed, and placed them under arrest. Their crime? Interracial marriage. This is the story of Loving versus Virginia and the landmark civil rights decision that would set an important precedent for marriage rights in America. Richard, who was white, and Mildred, who was black and Native American, spent the early morning hours of July 11th in jail. They were tried and found guilty of violating Virginia's Racial Integrity Act of 1924, a series of laws that made race mixing illegal. The Lovings were then given an ultimatum: spend 1 year in prison or leave the state of Virginia for 25 years. Frightened and unaware of their legal options, they moved to Washington, D.C., where their marriage was legal. They raised their 3 children in the nation's capital, financially strapped and isolated from friends and family. 5 years later, they returned to Virginia to visit Mildred's relatives, but were arrested for a second time for traveling together. Inspired by the burgeoning civil rights movement, Mildred decided to fight back. So in 1963, she wrote a letter to U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy asking for his advice. Kennedy referred the Lovings to the American Civil Liberties Union, who assigned their case to 2 young lawyers named Bernard Cohen and Philip Hirschkopf. Cohen and Hirschkopf took their appeal all the way to the Supreme Court, arguing that Virginia's anti-miscegenation laws violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed African Americans citizenship and all its privileges. The broad and sweeping language of the amendment, they argued, made no mention of interracial marriage, and thus guaranteed equal protection of a human being's right to marry. Attorneys from the state of Virginia argued that the state's rights should be prioritized over federal laws. But the argument didn't hold up. On June 12, 1967, the court unanimously struck down the Virginia marriage ban and overturned the Lovings' conviction. The court ruling reverberated across America, invalidating anti-miscegenation laws not only in Virginia, but in 16 other states that held them as well. After winning their case, the Lovings were finally free to do what they wanted to do all along. They lived quietly in Virginia as husband and wife until Richard's death in 1975.
Now, think about that. 60s, it was still illegal for people to marry, so it was still illegal for people to have mixed kids, right? If so, the rule or the law, pretty much, if they can't marry, they can't have kids. Okay, and then if they can't have kids, then that would stop people from being together, and that would also stop people from mixing the race, right? So the one drop rule was another way to keep people from coming together and to keep people segregated from each other, because they didn't want their towns mixing. They wanted the blacks to stay here and the whites to stay over there and nobody come together, because if you did, and you did have a child, especially if you were a woman, you were going to be punished for having a mixed child. And then to go as far as to, well, if you can pass as white, we need to figure out a way that tells us if you have 1 ounce of black blood in you. And that way we know during segregation who uses colored restrooms, who uses the white only restrooms. That was another big part in segregation. Even though people on the street couldn't tell, just from looking at you, you might be black, but you can pass as white because you're mixed. So what are you using? Wouldn't that be kind of confusing? Right? Like one drop, they say I'm black, but I pass as white. So can I use that restroom? Can I use that water fountain? It would be, so just looking at the woman's right aspect of that. You're saying that, okay, I have a child and I'm going to be punished. But if this man has a child with somebody else, he's okay. It's okay for him. And then they have to prove that it's his, right? So how would that, so let's say Emmett Till, right? Let's say he whistles at the woman like they said he did. Wouldn't that put fear in you? Say, well, I don't want to have a child with a black person because I'm going to go to jail, right? I'm going to go to prison. What's going to happen to my child? We can go all the way back to slavery and Thomas Jefferson. We want to intermix the Indians with the white people, but we don't want to intermix white with black. But yet I have descendants with a slave who was part white. So the woman he had children with, right, was a slave who was a part of that one drop rule. She was part white, but she was considered a slave after being born, because if we look at the rules, then that would have meant her dad was black and her mom was white or somebody else was white down the line, and therefore she's a slave. But then if her dad was white and her mom was black, she would have never been a slave. So now we're in 2020 and you have interracial marriage, you have people having kids, and then they're automatically, still today, we would consider them as black. Right? You see me, you see my wife, and you see my child, we would say he's black. The other way around, white man, black woman, same thing. But back then, if it was a white man and a black woman, it was, well, since it's a white man, it's still pure. The purity is still there. So the white race is fine with that. But if it's a black man and a white woman, then that's not okay, and that's not pure. So then you have all these different rules. And doing this research, I mean, it throws you everywhere. I was just telling Katie earlier that I had to cross-reference this with that and make sure that everything is right, because there's so much info, but then some of the info you don't know is true, and it's really confusing. And they try to keep it kind of another part of history that is swept up underneath the rug that they don't want you to know. So after doing about 6 hours of research, that's what I came up with, after cross-referencing everything and figuring out, the 60s, the civil rights movement. That's the part that people don't talk about, is the interracial marriage was still outlawed then in the southern states, right? And if you wanted to get married, like in Virginia, you had to move for 25 years, or you had to go somewhere else. The story that they don't tell you in that clip was the Lovings actually went to Washington, D.C. and got married, and then came back to Virginia. And when they came back to Virginia, they were laying in bed, and the cops bust down the door and walked in and shined the light and asked them what they were doing. They showed them the wedding marriage certificate, and they said that Washington, D.C. paper doesn't exist here. It doesn't work here. So they still got locked up again after they were married, legally, in D.C. Yeah, if you're filling out an application, my son goes to fill out a job application. What does he put on his application? What does a lot of these kids put on their application? On a job application, is it just one? Or can you put both? On the census, you can, right? But that was just 20 years ago. Just 20 years ago, not that long ago, that you were defined by one race. So you had to pick. So if you were mixed but looked black, you put black. If you're mixed but look white, I mean, what do? I saw another thing. It said if you were mixed, you automatically were considered the lowest citizen. Okay, so if you're mixed with white and black, you're automatically considered a second-class citizen. You automatically took on the black race. Right? Like that was it. You automatically took on that race. No questions asked. Even if you looked white. So for those people that think that they're white, I would love to see DNA tests now, since they can do all that stuff, and see exactly what people come up with. There was a white supremacist in North Dakota who wanted to make a town, a all white town and a safe haven for white supremacy. He went on to a show, and it was a black lady show, and he agreed to do a DNA test. He came back 86% European. It's 14% African. So according to the one drop rule, he's black. But he lived all his life believing that he's just white. He's pure white, nothing else, right? He's just pure white. There's no other race in him. And then come to find out after the DNA test that, hey, not so much. You do have a little African in you. So with that, we'll open it up for questions or a discussion. Not all at once.
Brandon?
Yeah.
What is your stance on having people declare race on, for example, a job application? Isn't that illegal? Where is it still legal to have someone declare race besides a college application, which in itself is a little odd, but yeah.
Yeah, if I go fill out a job application right now, it'll have black, white, what?
Really?
Mexican or whatever. Okay. Yeah, it'll have all that stuff. I mean, it's not. I guess I don't have to fill it out, but they do have you fill those out still. And then, like I said, the census is the only thing that I know that you can fill out multiple races.
Okay. Is that because of diversity requirements, or why is that still a thing?
Affirmative action.
I've been employed for a long
right?
time.
Right. You have to hire so many minorities, right?
Okay.
For jobs. So yeah, you still have to
Okay.
fill out those. Yeah, to fill out those applications. If you don't fill it out or you don't have it, let's say everybody you call might be white, and then you're like, well, we got to get some black people in here or a minority somehow. So how do you know that if you don't have that on the application?
Okay. I see.
Yep. So affirmative action would be my answer to that one.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody else? You guys been quiet the last 2 weeks.
I would just not necessarily a question, but comment.
Okay.
In the education setting, we still just list. When I was working in a Peoria school, and we had to collect data on students, we always collected data on students as male, female, and then black or white. And those were the only two categories I could put students in, as black or white. And that was like always a struggle for me because most of our population of students were mixed kids. My class was made up of more mixed students than Black or white, but they automatically went into the Black category. And I never could really make sense of it. And I was like, why is there not like another category? Or like, why are we, I don't know. So it would be interesting to see if that's like taken into consideration. I doubt it anymore today. I mean, that was just like 2 years ago.
Right.
But the reason why we then looked at that, we looked at the data to see how our Black students were progressing compared to our white students. So to me, it just didn't make the most sense because it wasn't just, Black students was like a much bigger group or diverse than just white. So it left the white students that were just pure white, So it always made, that was such a smaller population that they just always looked, they were always doing better. So it was always like, what do we do for these students? But it was weird to me. That was, when you were talking, I was like thinking about that. How strange it was that was the only two categories.
Right. Yeah, it is, crazy how, you get two categories for how many different races, right? We're getting there, I guess, right? We're starting to see some things change, but it'll be a while, right? We got a lot of work to do still, from like the one drop rule and the enslaved to the one drop rule in the early 1900s to the 60s, and then 20 years ago, you get to pick multiple race on the census. So yeah, for mixed kids, it's difficult unless you just pick both, no matter what.
Right.
So I was looking up some stuff earlier with mixed children and the percentage of the of everything, and I think one of them that I saw was a interracial marriage had grew. This is in 2018. It had grew from 7.4% in the United States to 10.2%. And so you're starting to see a change. It's always been there, but you're starting to see a bigger change in that. And with those rules going away, right, it makes it a whole lot easier for people to marry, but then places are becoming more diverse, right? So you don't have a lot of people just staying in their small rural towns. A lot of people are starting to move out, and once you get into a diverse city, a diverse area, you start to see interracial couples more. You start seeing mixed children more, and then even with the military, they travel all over the world, find somebody, and then marry them. You're starting to see a big shift in marriages and couples here in the last just 2 years. And I would say from what I saw in the last 10 years, it has been a big shift in that. So, which there are some people, of course, everybody knows that there are some people that are totally against that, right? So one group that I didn't talk about was the Klan in 1920s. The Klan were, getting bigger and really stopping the interracial couples from getting together, right? If they saw a black man with a white woman, not happening. Okay. And if their buddies was a white man trying to talk to a black woman, nope, not happening. But the Klan in their Bible, they say that interracial couples are a abomination in the Bible. Now, the Bible that I've read has never said anything like that. So that means that they are adding stuff to the Bible that should not be there, which is a sin in itself, right? So they're making up stuff to justify why they don't want that, and they're trying to use their religion by stating that it's an abomination for interracial couples to be a thing. So I know that's kind of off subject, but just thought I'd throw that in there, because what we're seeing now, we always say everything comes back, right? There's going to be more people getting married, and you're going to see more people that are against it. It's not a big thing right now, but it will become at some point, right? Right now we have all these other issues, but trust me, it's going to come. We get looks all the time. People might not say anything, but they can say it with their eyes in their face. So just living in a society where it's a problem to love someone of a different race is an issue. And then, but all those issues come down to these laws that they had years ago, over 400 years ago, right? So any other questions, comments?
I had a crying kid, so I just got back. So
Okay.
if you already talked about this, I apologize, but I don't think last week we talked about the rally in Elmwood, and I just kind of wanted to see what your thoughts and feelings were about that. How did you experience that?
I thought the rally went great. Right. It was peaceful, like we said. There are a few people that were trying to disturb it, but I felt like everybody that was there for the right reason did the right thing. And to be a part of something like that in this small community was awesome. To be a part of something that felt sparring, right? So bringing in slaves to help them get north, why not? So I had chills the whole time on that hot day. It kept me cool. And then just afterwards, right? Like nothing negative, because you couldn't say anything negative. And the way that we represented the town, I felt was awesome. And then I got the 2 books dropped off after that to talk about the Underground Railroad in Elmwood, and I need to start reading those so I can talk about those on here. But a lot of people don't know what this town was built for, the reason this town was built. And if they did know, maybe, just maybe, we might be able to change their mind. Yeah, I'm gonna get into these books a little more, and it is to live here now after what I have read is amazing. So yeah, I thought the rally was awesome, and I think we need to do something else. I'm like ready to do something else. So yeah. Anyone else? And I need to stop covering these these topics so well. All right, so so what we covered tonight, right, with the one drop rule, there's so much more out there. I could talk for hours on this subject, which nobody wants to hear me talk for hours. I will keep that stuff short, but history.com, of course, has some info. And then there's tons of articles out there. But you have to be careful. Some of them, the dates will be different. So you have to kind of get 2 or 3 of them that have the same thing before you start going with what they have. Yeah, it is. Another thing I would talk about is something personal. Is when you are a Black guy moving into a all white community, you start thinking about your choices of, hey, who am I going to be with, and what's going to be the talk, or what's going to be the overwhelming thought of you being with somebody of a different race, right? So when I moved in to town, I didn't think about dating anyone here because I thought everybody would be against it. I thought everybody in Peoria, where I came from, would be against it because, and we're talking early 2000, right? That, coming from Sterling, that was what, 95% Black, Coach Faulkner, to then coming to Elmwood, that was 100% white.
Yeah.
So what would happen if you end up with somebody and then you have a kid, right? Like those are things that I thought about because obviously things I really wasn't paying attention to, but it was always in the back of your mind, right? So, hey, Coach, you came from Sterling to Elmwood.
That was a culture shock for me because I spent 10 years in 150, and the school, I mean, going from, spending a year at Sterling and then going to Elmwood and then going back to District 150, it was definitely a shock seeing so many white kids in a classroom for me, which just sounds funny to say now. And now I'm going to Brimfield and, we have 99% white kids too. It's a totally different world of going from where we were at Sterling together when we first met, when you were what, 13 years old or 14 years old to today. Yeah, it was a shock for me, and I'm not kidding. I was shocked by a lot of things. I mean, I learned a lot out being from Chicago, then going to Peoria, then being out at Elmwood. It was a shock for me.
Yeah, and then he was really shocked when he saw me in the hallway.
Yeah, that was crazy. I was like, "What is Brandon Butler doing out here?" It was just it was an experience, yes. But I, going along with speaking with having two kids that are biracial. Anthony looks, as people always say, Anthony looks more black than Aiden, which I never understood that one. But it's amazing the comments, like people who come up to me and say, what happened if Ainsley marries a black guy? That to me is the standard that I still cannot believe people have the ignorance to come up and say to me, or just like, if they ask how would you feel if Anthony or Aiden married a black woman? It's just like as long as the person's nice. I mean, that's the way I never looked at skin color as being the important issue for my kids. Is the person the kid's going to date going to be nice? Yeah, it is amazing. This the one drop rule is something I learned about a long time ago when I was 150. It's a continual. I think for me, for school, it looks like it's just for data purposes. It doesn't make sense to me because when I was at Von Steuben Middle School, we had 90% of the kids were African American. We had a larger percent of kids being biracial the first year I was there. By the time I left 10 years later, I'd say it was 70% African American and 30% biracial. So the change was occurring a lot more, and it was seeming to be more understood in Peoria for a while there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So then, moving out here and that's not, I mean, I wasn't really worried about it because I came out here so I could play sports. I didn't really care about the whole dating thing and all that stuff. I could care less about dating then when I was a freshman, sophomore. But then, you start dating somebody and then you start getting serious, and then as you get closer to, hey, I think I want to marry her, all that stuff pops up again, right? All of that stuff pops up again in your head, and you have to think. You have to think about. I mean, you don't have to, but it does come up. What are other people going to think if you marry her, right? If you marry somebody out of your race, and then what are people going to think when you guys have kids? And then how's your kid going to be treated after you have a kid? And then it becomes how's your kid going to be treated by everybody? Because I will say for biracial people, you get it from both sides. You're either not white enough or you're not black enough, and you won't be liked by both races because of that, and some people just can't, you can tell they are mixed, period. There's no questions about it, right? And then there's some people, like Coach just said, Anthony looks blacker, so automatically he's black, right? Like people aren't going to say that he's mixed. And then with my kid, he's not dark. He you can tell that he's mixed, and we had that discussion when he was younger, because he was going around and he's telling me that he's white. Hey, I'm white. So we had to sit down at the age of 5, I believe, and have that discussion. Like, actually, you're both. You're not just white. You are mixed. But we don't go by that one drop rule. You are me and your mom, and that's it. So on our census, He's not black. He's not white. He's both and other, right? Because that's what he is. So we don't define him as a certain race. We don't define him as black or white. He's both, and we define him as he is mixed. So yeah, those are things that we should not have to think about, right? We should not have to think about, hey man, what are people going to think when my kid is mixed? How is he going to be treated by both sides because he's mixed? And then how are people going to treat me because I'm with a different race? Or how are people going to treat my wife because she's with a different race? We should be past that stuff. It's 2020. We should be past all that, but obviously we're not. The reason why I'm doing these classes because we're not past it. And I hope to continue to do these classes. I'll be getting a podcast started here shortly, within the next 2 weeks, hopefully. So then I can record it and then people can listen to it in their cars and that kind of stuff. So with that, I will close it out for tonight. And I would like to thank everybody again for coming and joining tonight. I know it's hard for everybody to get here, but we try to make it easy for everybody by posting them on Facebook. And then, like I said, I'll start these podcasts here in the next week or so and try to get that stuff out to everybody and probably start a page for that too. So thanks again for joining tonight. We'll be back at it next week. I have not decided yet on what I will talk about next week, but if anybody has anything that they want to learn about or anything that they know about and want to hear something that I put together, please let me know.
Hey, Brandon.
Yeah.
I do have something potentially.
Okay.
When I was talking about how we collected the data, one of the reasons why we collected data that way is because statistically, obviously, most teachers are white females in our country. There's a lot of not necessarily intentional things going on, but there are things that happen, and there's like a lot of research out there that there's just the expectations there for white students are not the same for the black students, especially male black students. So that would be maybe an idea. I think that we are getting way better at it, but I'm sure that there's still a lot of stuff to unpack with that.
Right. Yeah. Well,
but that's still a huge concern in our country today.
Right. Yeah, it's I would say, I mean, heck, that goes back to desegregating schools, you know. So yeah, that I'll definitely put that down. And
and there's those, those implicit bias that we have yet to deal with,
right.
As a whole.
Right.
And, the idea that, black students are bound to not be as successful as white students anyway. So the expectation for them to be successful, we just don't put that pressure on them, and we generally speaking, but
yeah, that's definitely something that needs to be addressed. And yeah, I wrote that down and added that to my list.
Well, thank you for tonight and all of this.
No problem. No problem. Coach, you had something?
No, I was just thinking, like, I was just trying to remember it when I was just registered the kids, and it's automatically. I can't remember if when I was going through it, because it's just a process now because everything's online. Is there a way to mark my kids besides African American? I don't think there was on even on the school. The school, I can't. Like I said, I was trying to look it up real quick, but I can't find it real quick. Just because everything's electronic now, it's just because you had the option of continuing their education through that, whatever it's called, or you can register a new student. And I can't remember. I think they just automatically marked them down as African American. I don't think there was another choice on there.
Yeah. I want to say we put other last week just to kind of screw with them.
Because right. Because think about it. It is other. To me, I think they're down as African American. I never, I didn't. I always thought about it, but just to me, I can't remember even seeing if it was other was an option. So
right.
That's good to know maybe for next year.
Yeah. Because like I said, we don't define our son as black or white, so it's constantly like other on everything, except for the census, which we actually get to put both. So yeah, it is, and they might have already just had it since you're already signing up anyway. Whatever you did put in last year, it's probably already there.
Yeah, that's what I think it was. I didn't even think, like I said, it was just one of those. There's so many paperwork to fill out. I just kind of kept on going through it. So
right.
And one of the choices when I was signing up for grad school was go to white, black, Hispanic. Like that's a whole totally different genre there.
Right.
Asian or Aleutian Islander. And I always wanted to check Aleutian Islander and just freak somebody out.
We're adding some boxes,
I don't even know where an Aleutian Islander would be from, but I think it would be cool.
That would be funny.
Yeah. The box that is what is it? White, Caucasian, non-Hispanic box. Is that?
Yeah.
I think that. Yeah.
Yes, that's a lovely one.
And then there's the Hispanic box. And I'm like, wait, if they put white, non-Hispanic, I don't know. It's kind of crazy how they have all these different boxes for, and then it's black, African American, but that's it. It doesn't say non-Hispanic after black, African American.
Hey, Amy McKinty, you still on? Amy, you there? I think that's for testing. That's what I'm trying to think, because I'm a science teacher, so we never get we do testing like every once in a while. Do they break down the school testing, like map testing and all that stuff? Is it broken down by race, or is it broken down by?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Okay. Like I said, I do science, so they don't like us. They don't care about us, so we don't have to test that much. So, we don't. Like I said, I know, like for map testing and all that, I'm going to be facilitating this year. I just didn't know if they broke it down by. I knew it was by gender at least for the science test. I didn't know if it was by race. Then okay.
Yeah. So.
All right, Brandon. I'll see you next Tuesday, or probably see you before. All right. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. You guys have a good night. Thank you for joining again. And we'll be doing this next week.
See ya.
See ya.